They did it again. Valve continues its dominance in multiple genres, only matched by a few select studios like Riot and Blizzard. This time it's a bit different though. Their newest quote-unquote release, Deadlock, is actually a combination of two of modern gaming's most popular genres, MOBAs and third-person shooters. This mixture has created something that feels unique in the current environment of multiplayer games. By taking aspects from both genres and adding in a bit of innovation on top, Valve continues to prove that they do more than just run one of the biggest digital storefronts for games. They're still making some pretty good ones too. Straight off the bat, Deadlock isn't a very accessible game. And this isn't just because it's been in a state of semi-secret invite-only playtest for months now. The design choices that make the game so interesting can also make it particularly hostile to new players. This is because it generally transplants gameplay from one genre into the game mode of another. And since Deadlock will inevitably interest players from both, many of them are going to be in for some hard and brutal lessons. Once you get a grasp on its nuances though, the game creates some of the most fun sequences you can play in any multiplayer game today. Let's take the shooter aspect first. Traditionally, MOBAs are played from a top-down perspective, or otherwise limited to attacking and moving in 2 dimensions. This is largely because of their origination in the original Dota map for Warcraft 3. It's probably stayed this way since the player base of the genre is used to it, but also because these games can get pretty complex. They're not quite at RTS level, though they obviously share enough DNA that they can often feel out of reach for your average COD player. While Deadlock bucks this trend by saying, why not let them have a dip, duck, dive, duck, and dodge in 3 dimensions at a tactical level while keeping track of all the usual MOBA trappings at a strategic one. This third dimension has major impacts for both attacking and moving. The introduction of a Z-axis means that players can now aim up and down in addition to the left and right movements that the X and Y axes provide in traditional MOBAs. In less geometry-based terms, this allows for a much broader range of attacking options, as well as raising the skill ceiling dramatically when aiming basic attacks, as well as many abilities. And while it might seem intimidating to make one of the most difficult kinds of games to get into even tougher, it's actually the opposite in a way. In reality, a third-person shooter perspective and aiming style can make Deadlock more approachable than other MOBAs because of their prevalence in other genres where players have built up muscle memory over time. For movement itself, the ability to have a functional jump that's more than an emote allows players to embrace the verticality of Deadlock's map. And combined with the ability for each character to dash multiple times, fights become a flurry of bodies that need to be kept track of lest they slip out and sneak up behind you. It also allows for some interesting movement tech, letting players rapidly traverse the map's 4 lanes. Taken all together, adding a third dimension to a MOBA might not seem that wild on paper. The results in-game tell a different story, though, and allow for a vastly more dynamic battlefield that creates scenarios which simply can't play out in the genre's most popular games. Another major mechanic is one that Dota players will be familiar with, denying creeps. In Deadlock, like other MOBAs, when a player gets the last hit to kill one of these lane minions, they will receive bonus currency as a reward. Unlike other MOBAs though, this currency isn't rewarded instantly. Instead, when a last hit occurs, an orb floats up at the deceased creep's location. Once it lasts a certain amount of time, it pops, awarding the currency. The thing is, this orb can be destroyed by friend or foe to either secure the extra cash or steal it. This adds another layer to the laning phase, in addition to the typical farming of minions and poking of players. It's also one that complements Deadlock's use of 3-dimensional gameplay. Players will need to get their aim and timing down to hit the moving targets and rack up as many souls as possible. This is on top of keeping an eye on the other creeps, enemy players, and your oh-so-important health bar. Denials play into 3 of the major skills MOBAs emphasize: positioning, awareness, and pushing a lead. All 3 are key to winning team fights late in matches, so they're great skills to emphasize at the tactical level earlier on as well. To maximize denials, players need to not only balance risking their own health to secure souls from the enemy creeps, but keeping track of their own and the enemy team as well. This acts as a microcosm of later game fights where a higher level of positioning and awareness is critical, allowing players to train under simpler and less consequential circumstances. Similarly, with pushing a lead, denials reward those who know when to time their reloads along with the aforementioned skills to secure them. This is yet another key skill that comes up later in the game, where, like in other MOBAs, the difference between a good team and a bad team, a lot of the time, is securing the victory. Motivating players to be intelligently aggressive early on can help to build up that muscle and secure wins more quickly instead of dragging them out. The very first mechanic you're introduced to every match allows rapid movement across Deadlock's massive map. Ziplines run up and down every lane and are the primary way to get back to base to heal and grab some items. This replaces the stationary casted teleport that's common in many other MOBAs, with a quick movement system that has quite a few unique quirks to learn and master. First, as creeps move up and objectives are destroyed, the zipline moves up as well, allowing players to get to the enemy base even faster. It should be kept in mind that this works for both teams though, and it can be easy to forget about a lane and get backdoored by enemies zipping to your base. Additionally, players can be shot off ziplines, so they aren't an instant escape button and actually need to be used thoughtfully. This acts like the casting requirement to get back to base from other MOBAs, and that it prevents players from instantly escaping when they put themselves in dangerous situations. But most importantly, ziplines keep the flow of a match in line with other games in the genre, despite featuring a larger map with more players. Stores also have some tweaks from the typical genre conventions. For one, there are stores in each lane during the laning phase, allowing players to buy items without zipping all the way back to base. It should also be noted that players will receive some gradual healing from a medic minion in each wave. The combination of this healing with the lane stores allow players to stay in the fight longer in the early game, preventing the monotony of running back and forth across the map. In the stores themselves, players will be introduced to a recommended build they can choose to follow when they first play a character. When they decide to get more advanced, they don't actually have to go to a website to look up the latest and greatest community builds. Instead, players can submit, view, favorite, and follow builds in the game itself. Now, how the list of builds themselves are effectively updated and maintained over time is yet to be seen, but at least initially, they provide a much smoother user experience than having to track down this kind of info in an external format. It definitely allows players who never thought much about build crafting in the first place an easy way to get familiar with it, as well as let players like me who don't care about it at all click on a build and focus on the combat instead. And even though I personally don't use them very much, I think it's important to mention the melee mechanics Deadlock adds to the traditional MOBA formula. These being a light and charged attack, as well as a parry that all characters can use. These attacks can be very important for dealing damage with certain builds on particularly tanky characters. They're also more generally useful because reloading is a frequent occurrence with infinite ammo, and melee can be used in the downtime to keep up the damage. Sorta like the switching to your pistol is faster than reloading style in other shooters. Well-timed parries can be used to deflect attacks from enemies, and even their objectives, meaning it will likely be a critical skill to develop at higher levels of play. What I appreciate is that Melee and Deadlock raises the game's skill ceiling without being necessary for success, allowing players to focus on learning other gameplay components first. I do think it's a fair criticism that all these mechanics working together can lead to Deadlock being unapproachable to many players, and it definitely is a lot to take in at first, depending on your familiarity with the games and genres it pulls from. Once you dip your toes in and get roughed up for a few matches though, you start to pick up on what the enemy team is doing and learn from them. Then pretty soon you're the one dishing out heat and going on win streaks. This learning curve seems to be necessary because of how Deadlock is trying to push the genre forward. Not everyone is going to like some or all of these changes, but for those that do, they provide a very unique experience. If you can manage to get an invite or wait until the game is fully released, Deadlock is one you shouldn't miss out on.